hope you had a nice lunch. Our next presenter for the day
is Sydney Redding, and she is offering a CEU for this presentation, so please pay attention. She'll offer a couple code words to you. Sydney is a licensed master social worker for Resolve. She believes that strength is built on the realization that one needs help and is willing to take the first step of talking to someone. She utilizes a supportive approach of meeting clients where they are, working together to achieve goals, and create coping skills together to support each individual in surviving and conquering difficult situations. She has experienced counseling and advising immigrant and refugee children through direct practice in St. Louis, as well as working with children and families through in-home therapy in Kansas City. Her passion is to help teens, young adults, and young professionals through therapeutic process to transition through challenging circumstances that may occur in life. Sydney's presentation is called A Story of Fire and Ice.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. Like she said, my name is Sydney Redding, and I am a licensed master's social worker at Resolve Counseling and Wellness. Just so you know, like she said earlier, I am offering CEUs for this presentation. There are 2 code words, and those code words are fire and ice. So go ahead and listen for those. I will be giving a presentation today on burnout and burnout prevention. So as I get this ready for you all, there we go. So like I said earlier, I'm giving a presentation on burnout and burnout prevention. So what we're going to learn during this presentation is how to define and understand burnout. So basically what burnout is. We're going to identify the difference between burnout and stress. We're going to understand how COVID has affected us during burnout. We're going to learn to identify the signs of burnout. And during this time of identifying the signs of burnout, we're going to go into a couple of different phases of that. So there's the 12 signs or 12 phases of burnout. There will be the basic characteristics of burnout, because sometimes the 12 phases can be a little overwhelming. And then also kind of what to look for in your workplace as well. And finally, we're going to go over how to foster resilience and how to handle burnout, right? So at the end of this presentation, the main points I really want you to understand are just kind of identifying burnout, being able to define it. I really want you to be able to learn the signs of burnout to see if you do have burnout or in that process of burnout syndrome. And then also putting in these coping skills in your life so that way you can feel good and try to handle that burnout that you are feeling. Let's go ahead and start out with what burnout is. So we'll go ahead and understand what it is. So burnout basically is causing this feeling of feeling overwhelmed. You're feeling overwhelmed at work. You're feeling detachment from your job, feeling detached maybe from things like hobbies or family and friends. Basically, it's feeling ineffective at home and at work, feeling really this lack of accomplishment and that you're not getting anything done. Sadly, burnout can affect you more than just the emotional side, right? So it can also affect the physical side of things as well. So the physical sides can be stomach aches, headaches, and things that can also end up causing things like lack of sleep, which then adds more physical repercussions. So overall, burnout shows up when we have when we have a lot of stress coming up in our lives. So we have an excessive amount of stress that's occurring around you through work, through life, and things like that. So when I was creating this presentation, one thing that started to confuse me was, okay, well, I know that an excessive amount of stress equals I'm getting into the stages of burnout. So what is the difference between me feeling stress and then me feeling overall burnout? So that's kind of what I wanted to walk you through next. So as you can see, what is next is it stress or is it burnout? How do you know what you're feeling? What is the difference? I have a picture that I found that I thought was super entertaining and very perfect for this. You can see that stressed Eric was able to show up for the picture. He's not looking his hottest, but he showed up, he's there. But on the other hand, burnt out Eric was not able to show up at all because he's just so unmotivated and has such lack of interest in even showing up for the picture. So this is a good way to kind of gauge stress versus burnout. So basically, stress is not the disorder, but burnout is the disorder in the end. Stress is this day-to-day feeling that we have, and this day-to-day experience that we have, but burnout has more consequences that are building up, right? Stress plus stress plus stress equals burnout. So it causes us to end up shutting down when we have too much of that stress. With stress, we see an end, we see the future. It might be hard to get to that end or to get to the end of the goal that we have. But burnout, on the other hand, is this cycle of negative thoughts, negative feelings, having that withdrawal. And it's basically us just losing and feeling burnt out, and emotionally, intellectually, and physically, and we're not restoring ourselves. So the easiest way that I've found to kind of understand the difference between stress and burnout is stress is having too much, while burnout is not having enough. So stress is having over-engagement. We're involved in too much. We have too many pressures on our plate. It's causing us to feel overwhelmed physically and mentally. We are feeling overreacted. Our emotions are overreactive. We're feeling this sense of urgency constantly, right? We have this sense of hyperactivity all the time. And it leads to a lot of anxiety disorders. And the main thing is stress can lead to physical damage. Burnout, on the other hand, like I said, is not having enough, right? It's characterized by disengagement. Your emotions are starting to become blunted. You're starting to not care. It gives you this feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. Your values are starting to be lost or skewed. You're not having that motivation you once had. You don't have the same ideas or hope that you used to have. It leads to this feeling of detachment, like I said, at work, detachment within your family, detachment to friends or hobbies, and also can lead to depression. Burnout also is primarily can damage you with an emotional side, right? Burnout can damage you emotionally and physically. Like I said earlier, you do have stomach aches, headaches, and things like that, but the primary damage is emotionally. So now that we kind of know the difference between stress and burnout, I kind of wanted to go over how COVID has affected us during burnout. So as you all know, right now we're having a lot of changes that are occurring with COVID, right? We started with quarantine, we're kind of back out of quarantine, the kids are in school, they're not out of school. A lot of things have changed because of COVID. And one thing that I found in the research I was doing with burnout was before COVID, the most people who were feeling burnout the most in this work was people who are caring for others. So nurses, teachers, doctors, social workers, therapists, there's a whole slew of them, right? So this was mainly because of the environment that they're in. There's a lot of time pressure, you have this lack of control, a lack of control over potentially the work process that you're in. So if you work for a government organization, you don't have as much control because the higher ups have all that control, or the policies have the control, right? There might be some role conflict, or maybe just a toxic environment in general. But taking that aside, you also have the added personal factors that you're a very empathetic person and working an intensely emotional job. So that also causes burnout. Now that there is COVID, burnout has increased that number of those in the caring field to feel burnout, but also has increased the number in a bunch of other places as well. So now burnout is high in a lot of other fields outside of the caring fields. So this is kind of what I found as burnout has developed through COVID. So the first one is people are working from home right now. Having that work-life balance has become extremely hard. This is mainly because we're having a harder time separating work from our social life or normal life. Because what you do is you wake up in the morning, you go to the office that you have set up in your house, you close the door if you have that, then you get out and you're still at home, right? So work is right there, home is right there, and it's really hard for you to separate that. So it's easy to get burnt out whenever you're always at work. you can't separate it. Another added stressor is, or cause of burnout is the stress of being a parent. Right now, I know that I've been working with a lot of parents, and being a parent and a professional in home is extremely difficult. You might have a meeting that's from 9 to 10 a.m. You're at home, you're getting the meeting done. Once the meeting is done, you're leaving your room, you're leaving the workstation you've set up, and now you're a parent. You're having to make lunches, you're having to make sure the kids are doing their online schooling. You're not able to have those 8 hours a day where you're just a professional and just doing your job and then come home and be a parent. Those are really hard to separate right now. So that is also causing burnout. And finally, the main one that is affecting everyone right now is this idea of decision fatigue. So decision fatigue is basically the idea of information constantly changing with how to approach the pandemic, the way to be safe, the best ways to be safe at home, the best ways to be safe at the grocery store, the best ways to be safe on sending your kids to school or not. You're having to constantly make these decisions to keep your family safe, to keep you safe. And that can be extremely exhausting. But not only do you have the decisions to make about COVID and how to keep your family safe, you're also making normal decisions like day-to-day life decisions. Did I fill up my car with gas? Do I need to do that before? Did I get the snow off my car? Am I going to the grocery store this week? Should I call them in? Did I pay all my bills for this month? And those are the normal decisions that we have to make. Plus, on top of that, we have, am I being safe while doing all of this, right? So the big thing right now is decision fatigue, and that's causing a lot of burnout during this COVID time. So my next slide is basically going over what to ask yourself if you feel like COVID is kind of ruling your life, right? Is it the main reason why you are feeling this burnout? So if you go through it, you can look and kind of mentally, or if you can physically, check off what is going on, right? So the first one is thinking about the coronavirus day to day all the time, and also looking up that information online all the time, right? So if you do that and it's kind of running your life, check that off. Do you ruminate or think about how long you're going to remain in quarantine? Are you tired all day long? Do you get restless at night and not getting good sleep? Is your sleep choppy? Do you crave this quiet mind? Do you feel like you have buzzing noises all in your head, that you have words flying around your head all the time, right? This idea of like a buzzing mind. Do you miss your old routine? And do you think about that often? Do you mentally walk through the what if scenarios of life, right? What if this wasn't happening? If this wasn't happening, what would I be doing, right? Are you tense most of the day? Are you missing your interactions socially with others? I know that right now we have a lot of people who are unable to have that social interaction because they might be immune compromised or it might be unsafe. So do you miss that? Are you grieving the missed milestones or the events that are canceled due to quarantine? A lot of people have had to put back happy moments in their life, like reunions or weddings, or maybe not having those big parties like Christmas parties or holiday parties that they're used to. Do you miss life's little pleasures like getting manicures, getting your hair cut, getting massages, going to therapy, things like that? Do you not leave the house often? Do you isolate yourself? And finally, do you think about the spread of germs and where your hands have been? So this one's kind of thinking, are you washing your hands constantly? Are you always using Germ-X or hand sanitizer? Are you thinking about the germs that are around you all the time? So if you can, go back and look at this list and try to check off and see if COVID is starting to rule your life or cause you to have burnout. So now that we've kind of talked about COVID and how it's starting to affect burnout, what we are going to go over now is the 12 stages of burnout. So these 12 signs or 12 stages were created by Herbert Freudenberger and Gail North. I'm not sure if I pronounced that name right, because it's very German, but they're the ones that created this. And you can actually find this on a lot of pamphlets. You can find this on like little posters on walls and things like that. It's a very well-known 12 phases of burnout. But I kind of wanted to go over this. So this basically shows you and walks you through what phase you might be in. And so while I'm going over this, I really encourage you to kind of take a second and see, have I had this? Am I doing this currently? And maybe see where you are in the phases. Maybe you're at phase 5, maybe you're at none of the phases, which is awesome. But I encourage you to kind of take a step back and think about where you might be in these phases. So the first one is compulsion to prove oneself. So this is basically obsessively demonstrating your self-worth. This will hit all the best employees. It's completely fine. But it's basically those employees who are really enthusiastic and they're taking on every single task that they can possibly get their hands on, right? So maybe overloading themselves with those tasks. So the first one, like I said, compulsion to prove yourself. Second one, pushing yourself to work harder. So by working harder, this means you have the inability to turn that off. You're taking work home with you, right? If you're at home, you're just working straight through the night, right? So pushing yourself to work harder can be very toxic because you can't turn it off. Number 3, neglecting your needs. This is extremely important that you don't neglect your needs, and we'll go over this later in the presentation. But neglecting personal care and your basic needs, like not sleeping, not eating. I know that a lot of people will skip meals, like nurses or even sometimes therapists will skip meals because they're like, oh, I need to help people, I need to get them in. That is getting to the signs of burnout, right? So making sure you have that social interaction, you're making time for food, and also that you're making time for sleep. Number 4 is displacement of conflicts. So this can be seen 2 ways. The first way is that problems are being completely dismissed, right? So there's a problem and you're completely avoiding it, you're pushing it to the side, it's being dismissed. The second way of viewing this is that you actually might feel threatened, panicky, and jittery, and you might get really irrationally angry with your coworkers, right? So the first one is misplacing it by putting it away. The second one is misplacing it by putting on other people and not putting it on yourself. Number 5 is revision of values. So values are extremely important in our lives. It's kind of what guides us through our life. So we have certain values that we like to follow, and it helps us lead us through like what we want to do with our careers, what we want to do with our kids, and things like that. However, this sign of burnout is basically when your values are starting to be skewed. Friends and family are being dismissed. Hobbies are seen as irrelevant. Work is the only focus. So a huge example that I like to use for values is family time, right? So if family is a huge value for you, it's very important, then you're going to make it for family dinners. You're going to make it for family game night. And what you'll notice is once your values are starting to be skewed, then all of a sudden you're not making it to game night because you have to stay late. You're not making it to the family dinners, or you're on your phone during the family dinners because you're answering work emails or leaving to take a phone call. I encourage you that if something like this is happening, to maybe check your values and see if you are starting to have the signs of burnout because they're starting to become skewed. The 6th one is denial of the emerging problem. So this is basically where you're having this high intolerance of people around you. Your social battery is completely gone. You don't want to be around people. People are starting to very much irritate you. You start to view your coworkers and maybe some family and friends as maybe stupid and lazy, very demanding and undisciplined. You don't think highly of them anymore. And basically what you're doing is you're viewing these problems as their fault. It's work's fault because they don't have enough time, when it's really these life changes that have been occurring. So it's because of the life changes that you're having all these problems. So if you're starting to deny the emerging problems and put them on other people or other things, then we really need to see if you're having burnout. Number 7, withdraw. So withdrawing means withdrawing from social hobbies, social activities, and things like that. So basically this is where your social life becomes small or even non-existent. However, we do use social life as a way to relieve stress. That is a good way, a healthy coping skill to relieve stress. So if you no longer have that way of relieving stress, what a lot of people will turn to then is alcohol and drugs, or turning to overeating or binge eating, and that can be fatty foods, salty foods, or sweet foods. So if you're withdrawing from your social sphere, then you're replacing that way to relieve your stress with something that's not healthy. Number 8 is odd behavior changes or obvious behavior changes. As you can already tell, like your behaviors are changing at this point. You have started to push yourself to work harder, you're neglecting your personal care, your values might have changed, you're angry and withdrawing from people, and people are going to start noticing this. So it's going to be an obvious behavior change because you didn't used to be like that. So if you have people coming up to you and noticing that you're no longer doing these things, or you're not acting in the normal way that you should be acting or usually are acting, this is a huge sign of burnout. Number 9 is depersonalization. Depersonalization is basically seeing neither self nor others as valuable. So you no longer think that your values matter, that no one cares about you, but you also think that you don't have time to care for others, right? Since you don't care for yourself and you think no one cares for you, why are you going to care for others and spend that energy doing that? So you no longer perceive your needs as important. You no longer perceive the needs of others as important. Number 10 is having an inner emptiness. So you're feeling empty inside and you feel very overwhelmed, and you feel like you need to replace that emptiness with something else. So like we talked about with number 7 with withdrawal, we want to replace that social with something else, right? So we want that relief. We want to feel like we're not empty. So what a lot of people will do is, once again, replace it with overeating, going back to those foods, salty, sweet, fatty foods, maybe sex, maybe alcohol, maybe drugs. Basically, you're engaging in activities to kind of fill that emptiness and relieve that stress. Number 11 is depression. So depression basically is when you're starting to feel lost, unsure, insecure, exhausted, and you can no longer see a future ahead of you. I know that I said this in the beginning, but this is a huge sign of burnout when you cannot see a future, right? Stress is where you feel that stress, it's a lot to handle, but you can see that future. But if you can no longer see a future, this is a major sign of burnout. And finally, you hit burnout syndrome or mental and physical collapse. Basically, it's time for full medical attention, or you highly need to go to a therapist and talk about these things. So these are the basic 12 steps or phases of burnout. So these are kind of a standard way to gauge it. It doesn't mean that they exactly come in this order. It doesn't mean that you're going to hit all of them. But one thing, like I said earlier, is I do encourage you to kind of look through them and be like, have I hit any of these? Because in order to not hit number 12, mental or physical collapse, we need to address the first ones, right? So 1 through 5, they're kind of worrisome and they're not healthy, but if we can catch it through 1 through 5, then we can help you better than when you get to total mental and physical collapse. So I know that these are a lot of signs, right? It's kind of overwhelming to go through and be like, okay, I'm not sure where I'm at. I'm not sure if I'm neglecting my personal care. I'm not sure if I'm displacing my conflict. What if I just had a bad day? Completely understand. It's okay. The 12 signs are kind of overwhelming. And so I did create a list of it's like the basic signs of burnout. So these are just maybe day-to-day experiences that you have. So like I said, there's a lot of physical sides of burnout, and that's having headaches, stomach aches, muscle aches, loss of appetite, or maybe overeating. You have that chronic fatigue, that physical and emotional exhaustion. You have that detachment in the workplace and negative thoughts towards work constantly. You're short-tempered. So this is mainly towards your coworkers, but can also be misplaced and put into your family, your friends, and things like that. feeling physically ill. I know that some people have said that they are feeling nauseous all the time, or that their head always hurts because just this idea of going into work causes that feeling. Difficulty sticking to a regular self-care schedule. Self-care is super important, and if you are not making time for it at all, this is a huge sign that you are on the track for burnout. Withdrawing from new responsibilities, not taking on new challenges at work, and overall just withdrawing from people or social interaction. So these are 6 to 8 basic signs of burnout. These are kind of the normal signs that people can feel day to day when they are feeling like they have burnout. So if the 12 signs were, or 12 phases were too overwhelming, this is a great slide to look at to see, oh, I do kind of have most of these. So these are the 12 basic, the 8 basic signs. And then we're just gonna go ahead and move on to causes of burnout at work. So we've kind of gone over the 12 phases that you might feel, gone over the basic signs that you might have on a day-to-day life. And now we're gonna go into, am I having it at work? Is work causing me to have burnout? So burnout can be caused basically around this idea of control, your expectations of work, recognition or lack of recognition at work, and the atmosphere of your work environment. So basically work-life balance, supports, the extremes of activity, and things like that. So the first one is basically having that lack of control. So we need to have this idea of control. If we don't, then we feel just like out of sorts, and we feel like we just don't have any handle on the job or on life. So an ability to influence the decisions that affect your job. This could be control of your schedule, control over assignments, control of your workload. But those are important to recognize, like, do I have control in my job? The next one is an unclear or overly demanding job expectations. So that breaks down into 2 different ones, right? So the unclear job expectations. So if you're unsure of what your supervisor or coworker needs, excuse me. So if you're unclear on what your supervisor or coworker needs, then you're not going to feel comfortable going to work. You're not going to feel comfortable asking these questions. But on the other spectrum, there's overly demanding job expectations. So this is basically taking on too much and feeling like you're drowning in this work, right? So there's 2 ideas of job expectations: feeling unclear, you don't know what's happening, and also just feeling way overwhelmed with them. The next one is having a dysfunctional workplace dynamics. So this is basically having toxic relationships in your workplace. Do you feel like you're constantly not being heard? Do you feel like you're not being recognized? Do you feel like people are putting you down at work? Do you feel like people undermine you at work or don't listen to you at work? So that's having kind of like toxic relationships, which can lead to burnout at work. You're not going to want to come to work. You're not going to want to work for those people. The next one is the extremes of activity. So there's, like I said, 2 ways of the extremes in activity. You could have this idea of drowning in work. People are constantly piling things on over and over and over, and you feel like you cannot get them done. You cannot see the bottom of that pile. Then there's also just the idea of having this monotonous side of work where you have nothing to do. You're just kind of surfing the internet the whole time. Makes you not want to come into work when you feel like you're not being challenged. So that is another sign of burnout. The last 2 are lack of social support. So this is feeling isolated at work, not feeling like you have coworkers to lean on or talk to. And then also this work-life imbalance. So work takes up a lot of our time. It can take up to 40 hours or more of our week. We spend a lot of energy at work and giving to work, right? This could be whether it's through making presentations, doing research, or caring for others. We spend a lot of energy at work and through work. So it's important to fill ourselves back up with things outside of work, such as family, friends, fun activities, hobbies, things like that. So those are kind of the causes of burnout at work. So that lack of control, lack of social support, extremes of activity, having that toxic relationship at work, not knowing your expectations, and that work-life imbalance. So now that you kind of have this grand idea of what burnout is, we know what it is, we know how COVID has affected us, we know how the 12 signs and the phases, the day-to-day signs that we could be experiencing it, and also if it's causing us, if we're having burnout at work. Now we're going to go into a more positive side of burnout, and that's how to cope with it. But basically, how to extinguish that fire and how to get rid of that burnout, right? So we're going to learn how to foster that resilience and how to handle burnout. So what I've done is I've kind of created a counteractive 12 steps on resilience to counteract the 12 phases of burnout. So the first one to really acknowledge is know that this is very normal, right? Right now we're in a very weird time of COVID, and your body is going to be constantly feeling a lot of stress because there's a lot of uncertainty. You could be working really long hours. You could be trying to figure out if my kids need to go back in person school or if they need to stay online. There are higher exposure rates now and higher rates in general, which can cause you stress and anxiety. Go ahead and give yourself some grace because it's okay that you feel this way. It's completely normal. The next thing is practicing that acceptance, right? Try not to judge yourself for the hardships that you're going through or the feelings that you're having. Acknowledge what you're feeling and respect those feelings. Sometimes that can be extremely hard because you don't want to be feeling those feelings, right? Acknowledge that everything right now is temporary and each day is a new day. But go ahead and accept where you're at. The next one is celebrating those small victories. For me, this has been a huge one whenever I've been feeling stressed, anxious, or even dealing with burnout myself. I currently am trying to get clinically licensed, and in order to do that, I have to collect 3,000 hours, which takes about 3 years to do. That's a really big goal, and that can look very overwhelming. So what I've told myself is every single time I hit 500 hours, I'm going to celebrate. So it's really about celebrating those small victories, right? Hit those 500 hours. Now I'm going to go to my favorite restaurant. I'm going to go to a park. I'm going to do something, right? So celebrate those small victories that are in your life. Congratulate yourself. You achieved a small goal and it's getting to the bigger ones. Way to go. And don't be afraid to do this with other people. Like I said, burnout is kind of that idea of isolating ourselves and not having that social interaction. Go ahead and celebrate it with your partner, celebrate it with your coworkers, celebrate it with your family, whatever it is. It's fun to bring them into this. The fourth one is focusing on your basic needs. So like I said, this was on one of the signs or phases of burnout, was neglecting those basic needs. But these are very important. So first thing that we need to do is make time for at least 3 meals a day. I know that we're busybodies. I know we have a lot going on and that you want to continue working through lunch, but make time for a snack break. Make time for lunch and dinner. The next thing is quality sleep. Go ahead and just start creating a good sleep hygiene routine, right? If that's no screen time before bed, go ahead and start implementing that. If that's doing a meditation before bed, start implementing that, but trying to get that quality of sleep. Making sure to add in that self-care, maybe exercise, and also something that's super important is drinking lots of water during your day. This helps to kind of flush out all the toxins that are in your body and also will help you to feel just more relieved during the day. The next one is kind of noticing and taking note of what is causing you stress, right? So creating mental health check-ins during your day. So taking time to stop and think like, oh, am I feeling super tense right now? Do I need to take a mental break? Am I feeling that my heart is beating really quickly? Am I feeling very irritated or irrationally angry at a coworker right now? Why am I feeling this way? So doing some noticing on what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? Did something trigger me to feel this? And then, like I said, maybe after noticing, you need to go into that mental break, right? So schedule in those brief mental health breaks. This can be a 5 to 15 minute break. You can schedule them in the morning, afternoon, evenings, whenever. But it's just a brief moment in your day. It could be just enough time to gauge what's going on, gauge how you're feeling, Maybe do a meditation, maybe do a little bit, I mean, depending on where you are, if you're at home, you might be able to do this. Do a 15-minute yoga break, something that's super easy that you can do to try to just realign yourself back. The next one would be social support. So like I said earlier, COVID has kind of caused us to isolate ourselves and maybe not have those social supports. And a big thing with burnout is also isolating yourself and not having social supports. So a good way to foster resilience is creating a lot of social supports. So basically, if you need to reach out to coworkers, do that. If you need to do this through Zoom calls, do that. Friends or loved ones, kind of create a social network that can be there to support you. You can also divide these social networks into different areas, right? You might have your sports people over here and you can hang out with them on Mondays for Monday Night Football. You might have your workout buddies here and they'll encourage you to work out. You might have those people who are super encouraging and just fill you up all the time. You can have a plethora of different types of social groups and social supports. But try to go ahead and create those social supports. Another thing is with those social supports, going back to those small celebrations, include them in on those small celebrations. That would be something really good for social support. Then adding in coping skills during your day. So this would be a great thing to add just throughout the day, but also during those like brief mental health breaks, is that you can incorporate something that will help you calm down or feel more relaxed. So this could be something that's sensory stimulating. So like if you have like sand or Play-Doh or a ball, you can like mess with it or play with it. You can have a candle that smells like lavender or essential oils or something like that, calming music. Deep breathing. So a good coping skill that I love to use is 4-square breathing, which is where you create a square with your breath. So you start at the top, take a deep breath in, when you draw a line down, and then you do that 4 times all the way around. If you're still feeling a little panicky or stressed, then I always encourage people to draw it backwards. And finally, cold water. Cold water is something that's really helpful with a coping skill, either by just drinking it and kind of analyzing how it feels in your mouth. How does it feel when you swallow? Did you feel it hit your stomach? But also putting cold water behind your ears, on your neck, and on your wrists can help you just kind of come back to yourself, right? Another one is planning. Go ahead and start planning for activities during your week, something to look forward to. My rule of thumb is go ahead and plan one small fun thing to look forward to each week, and then one big thing to look forward to at the end of 4 or 6 weeks. So that could be every single week you get to take your dog to a park in town. And then at the end of 6 weeks or 4 weeks, you get to go somewhere that's an hour and a half away and go hiking. So go ahead and plan for something that you can look forward to. This can be a date night, it can be a new hobby, it could be painting or going on a hike, it could go camping, meeting up with friends, trying new restaurants, trying new recipes. There's so many things that you can incorporate during your week. So go ahead and just plan for that one fun thing to look forward to. And the last 3 are kind of all go together. So the last 3 are control, structure and routine, and self-care. So the first one is control. And like I said, with what can cause burnout in your workplace, if you have a lack of control or feel like you have a lack of control, it can lead to burnout. So what you need to start doing is notice what you do have control over in your life. So make a list of those things in your workplace that you can control. You might not be able to control your coworkers, but what can you personally control? You can control your thoughts, you can control what you say, your actions. But control also bleeds over into structure and routine, right? You get to control your structure and you get to control that routine. You get to make that. So it's important to go ahead and create that structure and routine in your life because it gives you that sense of control. So structure is way more important during times of stress. It is good to kind of create this morning, afternoon, evening routine to get you through the day. It kind of helps you have this idea of like predictability in your life. You know what's going to come next. So I always encourage people to kind of create a routine, not only a morning routine of like getting up, getting ready to go to work. So putting on normal clothes, things like that, brushing your teeth, making your bed, whatever, but also a nighttime routine too. So if you make one in the morning, make one for the night. You have family dinner, you stop screen time an hour before bed, you read a book before bed or do a meditation before bed and try to get a good night's sleep. And finally, that goes into structure and routine is self-care. It's really important that you incorporate self-care in your life. So add that into your routine. This could be a lot of different things. So it can be house projects. I know that I enjoy cleaning my house when I'm stressed and I look forward to it. And then I put on an awesome playlist that just gets me pumped to clean it. It could be creating an exercise routine. It could be me time, a time where you can try a new hobby or something like that. It could be journaling or mindfulness, date night, friends night, whatever it is. But it's important to schedule a routine self-care time for you. It could be once a week or every single day at a certain time. So once again, the last ones kind of all go together. Control, structure and routine, and self-care. You get to control yourself, you can control the routine you make, and it's important to add self-care in your routine. And the last thing that I wanted everyone to kind of take away was you're not alone in this. Right now, a ton of people are feeling burnt out. A ton of people are feeling anxious. So you're not alone. What I encourage is if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling burnt out, to seek friends and family, but also seek professional help if you need to. It's okay that you're not feeling okay. It's okay that you're feeling all these feelings. And it's okay to seek help during a time of duress. And then finally, I kind of wanted to leave with a quote. So this is from an author, Laura Van Dernoot-Lipsky, and I read her book, and it's called Trauma Stewardship, an Everyday Guide to Caring for Yourself While Caring for Others. I recommend that if you're in the field of helping others, that this would be a great book to read. And what I wanted to take away, and the quote that stuck out to me, was if you are to do our work with suffering people and environments in a sustainable way, we must understand how our work affects us. We need to undertake an honest assessment of how our feelings or behaviors have changed in response to whatever trauma we have personally been exposed to. So if you are feeling anything, go ahead and call Resolve. Here's some things that we actually are able to do. We have some great clinicians and therapists. And we also are located in 2 locations, so Prairie Village and then also the Northland as well. So there is our contact information if you need anything. And I believe I'm going to open up the floor for questions.
All right, thanks, Sydney. That was great. There's a couple things that I wanted to touch base on. If you don't mind saying your code words one more time to make sure people have those written down.
Fire and ice.
Perfect. And then there was a question from the audience to try and get some handouts from you. You had a lot of really good material, and I think they were hopeful to maybe get that. So if you could maybe shoot it to our email, CARE4U2conference@gmail.com, and we'll remind you of that.
Yep,
you
perfect.
An email, and we get them out to anybody who's participating. So some of the questions that I have is, I would like to know some ways that you make time for yourself during the workday.
So during my workday, what we have is we can block off our schedule. So going back to the idea of having control on your schedule, which is really nice. I make sure to block off certain times during the day to make sure I can either just breathe for a second, but I also make sure that if I'm working around noon, that I block off the 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock hour. I want to make sure that I can eat. I know that I personally become very hangry and tired if I don't eat. So that's one thing that I have to put in my work schedule every day.
Absolutely. And what are things that you've noticed that have created stress that are leading to burnout for yourself, like on a personal journey where you're like, oh yeah, I was definitely, you can reflectively look back and say, oh, I was definitely burnt out. What are some things that kind of indicate, oh, that was stressful for you?
So as I was doing research on this burnout presentation, the 12 signs or phases of burnout really kind of hit me. And I like to consider myself as a go-getter, but sometimes that can really affect you in a negative way.
Absolutely.
And so the first sign was really just taking on too much work.
Mhm.
And what I tend to do is to overwork and to also try to prove myself.
Mhm.
And that is a huge sign of burnout, of just like taking on all those responsibilities and piling them up.
Uh-huh.
And all of a sudden you feel like there is no like future, there's no end to that pile. That was a big stressor for me personally, and that I had to learn to kind of say no to things.
Yeah.
And then a big thing for burnout for me is I notice that like I get headaches or feel sick
Mhm.
if I'm not taking care of myself.
Yeah.
So that's a physical sign that I notice for
Absolutely. Kind of recognizing what you need
myself.
and knowing your system and what it's asking for as well. So that's
Exactly.
great. And working with mental health working with clients, which type of mental health break or interventions have been the most popular? What do they seem to really enjoy that you've helped them get to?
Yes. So the 4-square breathing has been a really good one that a lot of my clients enjoy. A lot of people don't like the idea of being like, take time to breathe. And they're like, okay, I breathe regularly. I don't want to make more time for that.
Mhm.
The 4-square breathing is nice because you can actually draw a square.
Yeah.
So it's nice to just like be able to paint a picture of something.
Mhm.
So I have a lot of clients who enjoy that. I have a lot of clients who enjoy doing meditation through the Calm app.
Mhm.
It really walks them through it, and it really has helped them to 10 to 15 minutes to just calm down. And finally, the water trick has been super helpful for a lot of my clients. Being able to drink a glass of cold water
Mhm.
and taking that time to drink the glass of cold water, and also just kind of reflect on like the senses as you drink cold water
Yeah.
has really been helpful. Something easy to do while you're sitting at your desk.
Exactly. That's why I love all of them, because you can do them. It doesn't take a lot of extra time. It doesn't take a lot of extra resources. Most people can just do them
So right there.
at home right now. So if they wanted to, they could participate. And then I have a question here. It says, if you develop burnout, can you overcome this?
If you develop burnout, you definitely can overcome this. And we went through all those phases of how to overcome it, right? It's not an easy journey. A lot of people have burnout. We just want to make sure that you don't get to the phase of mental and physical collapse. Even if you come to that phase, you can still get through it. It's just going to be a long journey. But going through those phases of recognizing where you are, accepting where you are, and starting to add those social interactions and coping skills in your day-to-day life will really be helpful.
Great. And then my final question is, if there's somebody who's in a supervisory or leadership role and they start to notice that their staff show a lot of the stressors that are leading to burnout, what are things that they can do as a group or as a culture, as a community, to kind of shake that up a bit? I think that socially, I'm noticing a lot of groups are getting what they're called COVID fatigue. So people are not wearing masks, they're getting tired of it, they're kind of getting a little rebellious in nature, but I think that's coming from a similar vein as compassion fatigue. And I'm curious if as a culture, as a group, as a community, we can support that a little bit differently, being leaders in mental health.
Yeah. So I know that with the idea of compassion fatigue and burnout, something that supervisors can do, a huge part of the workplace is not feeling recognized. I know that there's a lot, this kind of goes with the COVID fatigue of nurses or people who are dealing with COVID and face-to-face, day-to-day all the time, are kind of like in this war zone all the time, and no one's complimenting them. They're just going through the day-to-day process and not getting recognized.
Yeah.
And that is exhausting, to feel like you're putting all this work in and no one cares. So for supervisors, just kind of taking those times to like congratulate your coworkers and those who work underneath you, and even just like throwing them like mini parties of some sort, or just leaving them Valentine's Day candy or Halloween candy or a Christmas treat or something like that to show recognition. Writing letters is a good one, but to show that they are being appreciated and that these supervisors or bosses are actually noticing what the others are doing. That's a huge thing to do.
Yeah, I've heard recently on a podcast, they were challenging one another to write gratitude letters to family members or friends, and they were sticking them in the mail, and it just was a way to kind of appreciate someone, and it made them feel more connected.
And so, yeah, I love the idea of writing letters. That's great. It's great. I think that was all the questions that we had for today. The presentation was awesome. I really appreciate your time and I learned a lot. So we'll get those slides to you or get that information to you as soon as we can. But for now, I think we have another 15 or